So when did we talk about the first Hocus Pocus? What was that? October of 2019?
It was whenever this picture was taken.
Look at that.
That
Man.
I just took off my wall. Sorry, audience, you can't see.
This is a visual medium. Holy cow. That was 29. Man, my hair. My God.
I know. My hair changed a bit too.
Yeah, we're 3 years older and a lot further down the road of
I got
life.
a lot more gray in my hair these days.
Okay. You can dye your hair whatever
I don't
color
want
you
to, though.
want.
I like it.
Oh
I
my
like
God.
the salt and pepper though.
That's fair. So, what you could go even further. Like it could just be full salt and pepper.
Yeah, I could just dye it the way it's going.
Yeah. That's hard though.
beat it
Like
to the
dyeing
punch.
your hair gray is impossible. Take it
Yeah,
from me. I've
because-
tried to do it.
Because what? It usually just ends up like silver or like,
blue. Or
Or
blue.
blue. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened to my hair. It was like I dyed it. We dyed it silver 3 times, and on the 3rd time, it was like I'm done here.
Right.
I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want to subject my hair to any more punishment.
So bleach.
But talk about subjecting your hair to punishment. Though I know Bette Midler isn't actually having her hair done that way.
Yeah.
On this episode of the Kulturecast, we're talking about Hocus Pocus 2. I'm still your host, Chris Tasher. I'm joined by my good friend, one of the hosts of the Scary Stories We Tell podcast and frequent guest on this show, and the co-host of the One Season show, which finally ended the Prisoner season last month.
Wow.
By the way.
Wow.
We definitely didn't record that like 3 years ago. I think there's like 16 episodes now. No, there's more than that because we've done more than that, right? No, maybe we haven't.
How many shows do we do? You mean a Prisoner? Or?
No, I think there were only like 5 episodes of Prisoner.
Really?
Yeah, but we recorded those so long ago. But if you want to go listen to
True.
that show, you can hear my co-host right now on all of those episodes, your friend and mine, Jess Byard.
Hello. I am back.
I was not at the time when you and I podcasted about this movie, the first one, randomly, seemingly.
Right.
I was not that big of a fan when we talked about Hocus Pocus back in the olden days. But on this episode, we're doing another bonus episode because it's October and we like to run ourselves ragged in October. So we're going to be talking a little bit about a movie that just came out last week on Disney Plus. So you can watch it for free if you have a Disney Plus subscription. We're talking about a film that honestly, in a lot of ways, can't even believe exists. Hocus Pocus 2.
I banish thee from Salem forever.
They were right to fear thee. Magic has a way of uniting. Happy 16th birthday, child.
I have a gift for my favorite customers. Legend has it, it's on the 16th birthday that a witch gets her powers.
Lock up your children! Yes, Salem, we're back!
Gilbert, where did you get that candle? We have to get out of here. The witches will be here any second. Ah! The book is alive.
He woke up?
If we intend to live past sunrise, we have to steal their souls.
Whoa, wait, can we talk about this?
No. We must fly! We run amok!
Not freak out. The vengeful maniac obsessed with getting revenge on Salem sounds very bad for Salem.
We should get some salt. Why? So it tastes better when they eat us? Spread out. Sisters!
That's not 6 feet under.
Stop! I am a good zombie.
Yeah, I mean, like they talked about it for years and years and years, off and on. It was always just one of those kind of like fan hopeful, like, oh, there were some rumors that people were talking, or people saw Bette Midler and Sarah Jessica Parker. Da 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 da. It's like, okay, whatever. I never really actually thought they would actually do it. And then when they said they were, it all happened really fast.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. I think it really fast is the best way to put it. So, like you mentioned, the film came out September 30th of this year. It's directed by Ann Fletcher. It's based off of a story by David Kirshner, Blake Harris, and Jen D'Angelo. It does star Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Kathy Najimy, and Doug Jones. But then there's a lot of newcomers as well: Tony Hale, Sam Richardson, Whitney Peak, a bunch of younger actors, and then the kind of, I guess, legacy actors. And what is this movie about? Well, we're going to be talking spoilers. It's about the Sanderson sisters returning, but not the way that you might think at all, even, frankly. Let's since that Halloween episode was so long ago, Jess, before we talk about the second movie, thoughts on the first movie?
I will always love the first movie.
It's a good movie.
I've been a fan of it since, it came out in 93, so I was 3 years old. So obviously I didn't come to it until a few years after that. So probably around like 7, 8, 9 years old. And I loved it then. I will love it now. In that episode, I'm sure we talk about the various plot holes and, things that happen in it that are kind of goofy and whatever as adults. But I still think it's a fun movie. I think that the, Sanderson sisters are a fun group of characters to see. And I think that they still are in this movie.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that the first movie, I wasn't a fan of it for the longest time. I think recently it's become this kind of like, oh my God, you don't like Hocus Pocus. Like now it's a thing. Yeah. Obviously it's a thing now, given that there's a fucking sequel to it. So let's just, get that out of the way right here. If this movie has a sequel, first one must have been important enough for some people, yes. But the first movie is a horror movie, period.
Yes.
Very much
yes.
so. Like it might not be a straight horror movie. It's more of baby's first horror movie in a lot of ways,
yeah.
But
it has real bad, right. It has real villains who
they're played like
actually,
villains.
There are stakes. There are very real life and death stakes in Hocus Pocus.
So when you come to the second movie,
mm-hmm.
There are stakes in this movie, but I think, well, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the movie, but Jess, I want to know, what did you think of Hocus Pocus 2?
I came to it pretty skeptical. Like I was happy, to hear that it happened. I was happy that it was Bette Midler and Sarah Jessica Parker and Kathy Najimy. Yes. Back. I was happy that they were actually all coming back, because if you were going to do Hocus Pocus 2, there's no point in not doing it with them. Right. Like they do carry the first movie because they're all actors. They're all real talent. Like they were seasoned actors before they got to Hocus Pocus, and they're able to carry the movie. In this one, I was really skeptical that the story and whatever the added elements around them would be. I figured that those three would still be on their game because they're very outlandish characters anyway. So I think getting to play up those campy roles, works for them. I thought it was good. I thought it was better. It was better than I was expecting it was going to be. It had an emotional appeal that, while the first one has an emotional pull to it, it was a very different one, relating to different themes that we can talk about later. But I liked it. It was cornier, I think, than the first one, in certain aspects. I thought that it was, because I've seen Hocus Pocus 1,000 times, it was interesting to hear a lot of dialogue and writing from the first one get recycled in this one, that I was like, I know those lines. Are those lines from the first movie? They're just kind of rewritten in a different way, which yes, there's argument for that being lazy writing, but B, I think that it actually worked in this sense, though. It didn't feel, I recognized it because I've seen the movie 1,000 times, but had I not, watched it a whole bunch of times before then, I don't think I would have noticed. So I think it didn't stand in the way.
So I, like I mentioned now with the original film, I came to it late. It's not something that I grew up with, not something that I have a big frame of reference for as a child. So I didn't have a lot of nostalgia for the first movie, which I think is good as someone coming to this movie, because it's interesting. This movie doesn't traffic in nostalgia as much as I thought it would, which is a very good thing in a lot of ways. And I say that because the reason that I personally feel like a lot of sequels in this day and age and the way that they're being made now, I feel like a lot of sequels are just like nostalgia baiting, using nostalgia as a quick and easy solution to actually writing an interesting story with character development where the characters that you are familiar with, the characters that you know and love, actually go through a transformative process. You know, if this movie had the Sanderson sisters just showing up, being bad, doing the song and dance, no pun intended, from the first movie, I think I would have just at the end of the movie gone, why did you make this? Why did you wait 20 years almost to make a sequel if all you were going to do was just recycle it? Oh, and the Sanderson sisters are back and they're coming to kill everybody and they're going to take children away. I'm glad that that was left in 1993.
Yeah. Like there's talk of that. That is definitely like, you know, when they do come back.
Right.
They are, you know, like, okay, time to steal the souls of children. And, but, you know, but there's other things involved and you actually get to learn, you know, at the beginning of the movie starts, you know, with a flashback of the Sanderson sisters as children, which.
I mean, that's as soon as I saw the opening of the film, I realized almost. I don't want to be like Mr. Smart movie guy, but I think you would agree. When I saw the intro to the movie, I think we both realized what this was going to be, which was
that we're going to be looking at the Sanderson sisters from a perspective that does allow them to change and not be the ultimate evil.
They're empathetic. They make them empathetic characters, for lack of a better word.
Which does kind of, you know, course correct a little bit in the idea that, you know, with Hocus Pocus and the whole idea of the Sanderson sisters and that they get hanged. They do get hanged because they were murdering children. That was a thing. So it does kind of validate the Salem witch trials in a way, in saying that, like, at least in the movie universe, it is because they were actually evil witches doing these evil things. But in this movie, you kind of see why and like where that comes from a little bit. And so it's, yes, making them more empathetic and making them actually set up to have an arc as opposed to just being a through line antagonist, like with no change whatsoever. Which, to your point, if they had done that, just made them come back and do the same thing just with new kids, I would have been very much like, why? What was the point? Because we did this again. Like, you're just going to have to get rid of that. Like, you'd have to just get rid of them for good. Right. And they would come up with a reason for, you know, a way of doing that. But I like the way that they chose this round to actually make them people.
Well, and I agree with you. I mean, again, like, that's thinking about it now with hindsight, the characters, I mean, the portrayal of witches in media, I think that's one thing I do appreciate about this movie is it kind of takes to task this idea that, like, well, it's always about the patriarchy and the patriarchy's doing its best job to keep, you know, women in line. And that's a big part of this kind of story that they're telling is, you know, down with the patriarchy.
Yeah.
So, and I appreciate that. I mean, I know that's going to really piss a lot of people who watch this movie off, which is fine. Sure. But at the same time, like, it's the truth. Down with the patriarchy. Down with the angry white men, like that. And that's the thing that I appreciate about the Tony Hale character, which is, again, like, he is a descendant of the Reverend who was antagonizing the Sanderson sisters, rightfully so. Again, I mean, that's the problem. Like, the problem I kind of have with this movie at its core, though, is what you just said. They're still child murderers. Like, they still did it's that. Not like you can't undo that. You can move forward and past it. And I think the movie does its best to do that. Success-wise, I think by the end of the movie, you don't care as much. Right. But it is a hard pill to swallow that they're mythologizing. I mean, look, you know, you and I have a scary podcast where you and I talk about weird, unexplained things in true crime, and they just did a Dahmer show. And they're mythologizing Dahmer in a little bit of a way. They're kind of doing that here. Like
Yeah.
you're mythologizing 3 murderers, but they sing and dance, so it's okay. Like it's kind of weird.
Yeah, they're charismatic and they sing and dance, and they make, they have quips and things, and they ride around on Roombas now.
Right.
But so one question I have for this movie is I'm a little confused on what the universe is, because at one point the Sanderson sisters, they're in somebody's house or whatever, and these 2 guys are watching Hocus Pocus. And so I'm like,
yeah, I don't get it either.
Yeah, and so I was like, well, wait a minute, is like
that's for people people that aren't you and I and other people who watch movies and ask those questions. It feels like they just did it, right? Because like that breaks everything right there. Like how are they watching Hocus Pocus? World. Yeah. How are they watching the movie that they're in?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's the same 3 actresses. Like if it was like, if they had done like a goofy, like little like reshoot of like a scene from Hocus Pocus where it was like 3 other actors playing the Sanderson sisters, I could see that. And then later on they run into like, because at this point, like the Sanders, and I guess they were in the first movie too, but the Sanderson sisters are like the icons and the like what you dress as at Halloween if you're a girl in Salem. And so they're meeting people and like little girls in costumes that they're wearing, which I know happens in the first one too. But yeah, it confuses me on what in what actual world any of this is happening, because if you're watching the movie that they were in, then I don't.
I don't understand, because to further muddy things, we have the character played by Sam Richardson Gilbert, who owns the old Sanderson sister house, which is fine, but he saw them.
He saw them. So
the night in 93
on Halloween night. Yeah. He was wandering down.
But that's a movie. But that also a movie. Like I don't understand. It again, like I appreciate what they were going for. I understand that they're trying to be kind of cute, but I don't know. Maybe it's probably our fault. We're overthinking it. Yeah, but also don't put Hocus Pocus in your movie.
Right, because now I'm confused. All right.
It's like in Harry Potter when in universe somebody plays that. Like, how do you know? How do you know that? Like, how do you that's a Harry Potter theme song? Like, how do you know that in universe? Or it's like when it's like in something like a new movie that just came out, Confess Fletch. It has John Hamm and John Slattery playing Fletch and his boss. And it's like, why did you cast them? Well, because they were in Mad Men, but that makes no sense outside of a literal real life point of reference. Like, how can you do that? I don't know. It irks me when movies do it and don't explain it. And they do it a lot. I mean, there are plenty of movies. There's plenty of movies where they're watching, movies from the real universe or not. I'm trying to think. There was something I was watching recently where they were like, oh yeah, like in Star Wars. And it's like, so Star Wars exists in this universe? Like, how the hell?
Yeah. Or, I mean, in not New Nightmare, in Freddy's Dead, Johnny Depp shows up on a TV with this is your brain on egg, or this is your brain on eggs. This is your brain on eggs. Smashes an egg. And so, I mean, like, fine, it's meta stuff. I get it. It's being cute, whatever. But it just seemed that was just that you have plenty of other nods to the movie happening in this movie.
Right. You don't need to show the movie.
Exactly. Like, we know we're watching. Thank you. And all of your references that you have made are landing very well, and you're not overdoing it. But this part of it is kind of overdoing it.
And I will agree with you. I think that the references for the most part are subdued enough. I haven't really seen anybody complaining about it, but Omri Katz and the two main kids from the original movie, not in this movie. And you know what?
Nope.
Good. Like, I'm dead serious. Like, Omri Katz, Vanessa Shaw, like, they don't need to be in this movie, because then it makes the movie, and then it makes Hocus Pocus about them, and it should be about the Sanderson sisters,
because it's about them having to overcome who presumably they would be very unhappy about the Sanderson sisters coming back, given that their experience with them was pure, we're trying to murder you or your sister. So now we have this conflict that we have to set up and have to then solve and make sure, that Danny and Max, come to see that the Sanderson sisters are people too, and like have, are worth empathy and and that just becomes, like you said, it becomes another Max and Danny movie. And that would also take away from the new teenagers that we have in this movie, who I think are very fun characters, and the talent that plays them is, I think, really good. Like I thought they were fun together. I thought they were what they needed to be. My main thing with them is that one of them, sure, okay, fine, has magic powers, great, is a witch, but they don't explain that at all. They don't go into the story at all. They don't even allude to who she could be possibly descended from, which they could have done in like the book or something.
Which they did do. So I wanted to mention that. So there is a sequel book that came out a couple years ago that was a recontextualizing. No, I meant
like in the book in the movie. No, they could have showed you.
Gotcha. Well, but my point is there was a sequel, there was a recontextualization of the first movie, and then also a sequel written in that same book. It was called Hocus Pocus and the All New Sequel. And it was the original movie, but they made a couple changes so that the sequel book that they also wrote in that book would work. And in that book, it was Max and Allison from the first movie's daughter who lights the candle, brings them back. And then there's this whole, it is what this movie would have been 10 years ago.
Right.
And I read it earlier this year, and it was exactly that. Like what
Very
you're mentioning.
Predictable. Yeah.
Well, there's a character in there who is a descendant of the Sanderson sisters, and she's a witch, but she's like one of the friends of the characters from the first movie's daughter. And so it's like everything's connected. It's like, I don't need that, because that is, I think, the pitfall of sequels is like giving people more of what they want, but nothing else. Like nothing new, nothing exciting.
Just more of the same. Let's see how much we can link this back to the first one as much as we possibly can.
So why not just go watch the first one? Like,
right. Instead of splintering off with interesting characters, doing interesting stories within that universe.
Right.
Which, we're still in the same town in this one. We're still in the same area. And there are some recycled, jokes and whatever, but it still works in a way that it does feel new-ish. Like there are new elements to it. And it's also, I was hoping, I was worried that it being, to 2022 now, how the modern world would be incorporated within the movie, because typically when they do, especially in these, more YA movies, it can be really irritating and overused, like just the amount of like technology and stuff that they have. But in this one, it was like next to nothing, quite honestly. Like what, they had cell phones.
Well, and that's the thing about this movie, I think, to your point, like it feels like a movie set in 2022, but it doesn't bash you over the head with it. It's still like it's a pretty straightforward, again, I think to your point, it's a rather simple story. I think almost it might be too simple.
Yeah.
There's no villain in the movie. Like I don't like halfway through the movie, the Sanderson sisters aren't evil anymore is what it feels like, or they've been toned down.
They're stripped from their, just somewhat spoiler alert for people who have not watched it, I guess. But, it's halfway through the movie, the book, Winifred's book, after Winifred performs a spell or when she is contemplating performing a spell that she's not supposed to perform under any circumstances, the book chooses, what is the main character's name?
Oh, Becca.
Becca. Chooses Becca, our teenage witch, to essentially be, owned by, I guess, the book. It's kind of like the lamp with the genie. It only works for the person who owns it. I don't know.
I guess.
This was
That's a new thing
because it wasn't a problem in the first movie. Nobody else wanted the book.
Right. Everybody just wanted to try and destroy the book or play keep away with said book.
Right. So the book chooses Becca, and then after that, like Winifred's kind of almost powerless, I guess. Like they're almost powerless without the book for whatever reason.
Which was never established in the first movie.
No,
It's like they can't do anything without it now, which
that wasn't a problem in the first one. The problem was that they couldn't, like, they needed a spell because she couldn't remember the ingredients for the elixir that
it wasn't that
making.
They literally couldn't do it, which is what this movie is positing now, I guess.
Yes, it doesn't outright say it, but they do get very, like you said, very toned down until they do completely get stripped of their powers for a minute. When Becca does a salt ring, and because she has witch powers, it like propels, whenever they use magic inside, it propels it like out of, I don't know. It can't work. Like it forms a shield.
I guess so. Yes. They trapped them in a salt ring at one point.
What I didn't get was that they alluded, like Becca's friends allude that the salt ring only worked because Becca is a witch and she's the one that poured the salt. But Max and Allison were not magical beings, and their salt ring worked just fine. So I didn't really get that either.
I didn't understand what the conflict was, because you have the Sanderson sisters come back and say, we're going to cast this crazy spell that's going to give Winifred ultimate power, but it has to come at a cost. It hints pretty early on. It's pretty obvious what's going on, what the spell is going to take away from her, which again, I don't appreciate when characters who were rather well written in a first movie all of a sudden act like idiots. And it's kind of like she acts like an idiot in this movie. She's like, I'm going to cast this spell and I don't care. And it's like, I'm not going to read the warning in the book that essentially alludes to what you have to give up, which is your sisters. And it's just, for me. And
I think some of that comes from them like wanting to make them empathetic characters. And like not wanting to make them as evil as they were, because then it's harder to like.
Is that the right move
for Winifred with what happens? I mean, no.
I asked the question, like, was it a good idea to make these characters sympathetic? Because
and here's the question, because here's my question, because what I was about to say was, well, for a movie that's would generally be geared towards kids, maybe there's not that much thought going into it. Like there's some plot holes available, able to be there just like there was in the first one. But my question is now, is this movie actually geared towards kids, or is the target audience our age group? Because it's very much kids can watch this, no problem. Like, honestly, this movie's less scary than the first one is, because the Sanderson sisters are not absolute evil.
Well, it's not scary at all. I mean, again, like not. That for me, I think is
true. It's not.
That's for me is the issue overall with this movie, is that it is not a horror movie. It is a comedy film, but because it's funny. I mean, there are some pretty funny moments in the movie.
It's a Halloween movie.
Right. You know what? That is exactly what it is. That first movie is a Halloween movie that leans on horror. This is a Halloween movie.
This is just a Halloween movie. This is a movie that you are going to watch in October. And like, sure, maybe you can argue that the first one is only an October watch too, but quite honestly, I could watch it whenever, because I do, it's a good movie. And even putting the witches aside, like as being the scary plot, as being the object of, fear in the first movie, the bullies always like kind of like scared me too when I was a kid. Like it just made me uncomfortable because they were super mean to Max and like in a really like real way.
Right. There's none of that in this movie.
No, there's none.
There's no secondary villain. There's again, we really haven't mentioned it, but there's the character of Gilbert.
There's a side plot where like there evidently was a falling out between the group of friends that Becca is a part of, but you never really find out why they had a falling out to begin with.
And then the shop owner is kind of a villain because he was tasked by the Sanderson sisters to get the potion ingredients. So he goes and digs Billy Butcherson, who was just hanging out this whole time, I guess.
Yeah, you find out that whatever happened, like when he allegedly fell asleep after the whole shit went down, he actually didn't fall asleep, and he's just been laying buried alive for the last 30 years. Not
very deep either. Like just like a foot underground, just hanging out.
Like, why didn't you just get up at some point?
I don't. I don't. I was wondering the same thing myself. Like he could come out every Halloween. He knows that much. Like I don't know what he would do. do.
And
But
you could go live in the sewer systems like they did, like they introduced in the first movie where he would like roam around and eat rats and stuff like that.
a Disney all-time classic, just
Right.
Doug Jones eating rats. I love Hocus Pocus too. Like, oh my God, Doug Jones is a rat hanging out of his mouth.
I am happy that he got that Billy Butcherson gets a bigger role.
Oh
in
my
this
God,
movie.
yes. Oh yes.
Not
for
like
sure.
not a huge one still, but he definitely does get some more screen time. His screen time is always fun. Like it's Doug Jones.
He's able to talk almost the entire movie, which is not. I mean, that was the joke. That was kind of the punchline up until. I mean, up until the end of Hocus Pocus, he can't talk, and that's the punchline to his entire character is Trollop.
Yeah,
him going on and on. Yeah, it's great.
You bitch. Nobody's getting called a bitch in this movie.
No, none of that.
This is not 1993 Disney. This is 2022 Disney.
Well, and it wasn't the original one wasn't even a Disney movie, right? It was a fucking Touchstone film. I mean, I
thought it was Disney.
I mean, again, like it's probably under the Disney banner now, but it was a Touchstone Buena Vista. It was a Buena Vista.
Yeah,
movie.
So it could get away with being
right.
It's a family movie, not a children's movie.
And I think that's what I was missing from this movie. Is this movie has no edge. It's completely sanded off, which is fine. It's the story that they're telling here is about redeeming 3 child murderers. But like the thing that made them good in the first movie was that they were like hilariously overly evil, but like inept too. Like they all checked a box for like what kind of like stereotype witch. You have like the witch who eats kids with Winifred, then you have the inept idiot witch with Kathy Najimy, and then the sexy witch with Sarah Jessica Parker. Like you check all the boxes. So it was about 3 characters representing one, and now it's like, oh, now they're all their own character and it's all its own thing and they're all going to be redeemed. And it's like, I appreciate that, but these are different characters from the first movie.
Right. And, and that comes into like what the themes of this movie are. And the overarching themes very much of this movie are about friendship and, friendship and sistership and, feminine relationship all around, like of what that means, between either it be a group of friends who've been friends, since kindergarten and are going through, big changes with being teenagers and stuff now, or that they're sisters who have been, with each other on and off for 300 years. And those themes are very sweet and they're very, I am glad to see them in movies, especially like in juxtaposition where the first one is very much like it's a love story about, it's a teenage boy lusting after a teenage girl. And like, I'm so glad they don't play up the virgin thing in this movie. Is really, there's one joke and it's fine. And then it's never mentioned again. Unlike in Hocus Pocus, where the virginity thing is mentioned probably no less than like 10 times. And it's always in a derogatory fashion towards Max. And like, and it's uncomfortable because Max is like 14, guys.
Yeah. I would hope, I would like, not that I would say like,
he is.
Yeah, like I know. Yeah, I don't know if that's weird to say. Like, I hope he's a virgin, but like they also make mention that like Allison in that movie is not virgin. Yeah, and she's also they allude 14.
To that. They allude to that. He makes there's a joke about her boobs. Like there it's a lot. Some of that 1993 edge is I am glad missing from this movie.
Yeah,
but
the insensitive edge, one might say.
Yes, but the actual like building of like a villain, a kind of fantastical villain story without actually having any real villains or there's no stakes in this movie. Quite honestly,
no. There is a villain. So Hannah Waddingham plays a witch at the beginning who, look, again, if you watch as many movies as you do and as I do, you've seen these tropes 1,000 times before. And they show her in bird form over and over again in the movie, even to the point where she's in the finale. And then there's a after credit scene too, which I don't know if you saw.
I did not.
Yeah. Sure. So at the end of the movie, the cat that's been running around, that's totally not anybody, supposedly, jumps up onto a countertop or onto a bookshelf, and in the background of the shot, you see a box that says BF2 2, BFC 2, Black Flame Candle number 2. So like the Black Flame Candle only has one thing to do with anything in this, and it's to bring the Sanderson sisters back. And if you bring the Sanderson sisters back at this point, like, why did you even bother making this movie?
Like at this point, I guess what
they're dead. They need to be dead.
The most logical and albeit trite, overplayed story that I could see from that is that they bring them back, and it's an effort to fight the bad witch from
that has to be what it is. Right. Or that is their mom. That is their mom. And they have to come back to fight her. Like, you know what I mean? Because it's like, who is she? Who was the Sanderson sisters' mom? Why are they just 3 children living in a house together at one point? Like, it's like
at the beginning, that's what it is. It's essentially like they're orphans, and Winifred has, taken on the responsibility of caring for Sarah and why am I spacing on her name? Mary. Jesus. I was like, Sandy? No.
Sandy Sanderson? That'd be a good name.
But yeah, she's tasked with caring for Sarah and Mary. And then they're like such like little nightmare children around the village that the Reverend is like, burn the children at the stake and try to separate them essentially. So yes, the heavy hinting of what inevitably will happen. But that's it. That's all we get of it. Like they just run off into the woods and they live in a shack, I guess. The shack that we see them in the first movie.
Yeah.
And
it's I don't understand why they had to have a prequel scene at the beginning of this movie. Like it feels like that's like a sequel thing now. It's like we have to recontextualize these characters in a way that makes them different or better or not problematic or not even villains in this case. It's like, God damn it, guys. Why do we keep doing this? I, as a fan, never cared about the Sanderson sisters' backstory. I don't know if you did, but me personally, it was not something I ever cared about.
I liked over-the-top campy villains. I mean, I liked them in the, I loved Ursula. I love Ratigan. I love, all the really above and beyond campy villains. So, Bette Midler, and especially doing that role, I just liked the cartoonishly evil thing.
Yeah. She's having a good time in that first movie being evil. And then we get to this movie and they neuter it completely. Again, it's not that I didn't like this movie. I just, for it taking 20 years for them to make it, I would have thought there would be more than this. Because this is really just like, you get to see the Sanderson sisters.
It feels very short.
Well, it feels like it came out on a streaming platform. Like in a lot of ways, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't feel like a movie in a lot of ways. It feels like a Halloween special, which is perfectly fine. But don't ask me as a fan of the original movie to forget the underlying character motivations that they had in the first movie. There's no way they would magically just change overnight. They were locked away by kids for 20 years. They should not want to, come back and be all about like, well, don't you know that everybody's into witches now and witches are cool? And it's like, but they're still child murderers. They don't care if witches are cool or not.
No.
All they should care is whether or not it makes it easier for them to achieve their goals. And I know we talked about at the beginning of this, like, well, if they're going to make this, at least they didn't just remake the last movie. And it sounds like I'm complaining that they didn't just remake the last movie. No, I'm complaining that they just didn't really make a movie. Period. It's not much of anything.
Made them evil for a grand. The problem is that they take away any of their stakes pretty much at like the middle of the second act.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then after that, it's just kind of a lot. It's a little bit of a meandering around, and them,
It's about family, Jess. Okay.
Yeah.
It's about the bond between sisters, and you juxtapose the new characters against the Sanderson sisters, and lo and behold, you have something that means something to someone. But again, it's like the easiest, laziest way of doing it. You have 3 characters, and then you have 3 other characters. Okay. Like, I don't know how else you juxtapose it any other way, but it's so obvious, right?
They could have kept them pretty, evil for a grand majority of the movie and had a reason for them to flip, or at least for Winifred to flip. And I mean, really kind of, I would argue that really Winifred of the 3 of them is probably the one that's honestly the truly like if we're using evil as like a general term, is probably the one that's actually like she's the instigator, right?
Right.
Like Mary and Sarah are kind of just doing whatever Winifred's saying because that's how they live their life and that's their dynamic. But if they were under somebody else who's like not an evil child eater, they would probably be like, all right, well, whatever. This is what we do too. So,
well, there's a moment in this movie where they show Sarah Sanderson
chaotic.
standing up to Winifred too. And that goes nowhere. Yeah. It goes nowhere. Literally, it ends in the scene that they bring it up. Like, why even do that?
Yeah, like after they get do the power and she's like, hey, I've taken care of you too throughout all of this. And I am just as powerful and I deserve to be treated that way. And then they play it off as a joke, I think. Right.
Yeah. It's literally a Marvel moment where they undercut a serious moment of possible character growth with jokes are funny and you're dumb. Yeah. It's really like you're dumb. And I think that's the other
gay.
I mean, that's the other issue I have with this movie is like, I think what you just mentioned, once again, it's all about Bette Midler, which is fine. But like Sarah Jessica Parker and Kathy Najimy are great actresses in their own right, and they should have been given more to do. And Kathy Najimy's character and Sarah Jessica Parker's character are barely witches. One has a siren call, and the other one sniffs the air and smells children. Wow. Winifred can actually do magic, I believe. Can they? Are they witches? Like you said, are they? Are they just sycophants? Are they just followers, not leaders?
I think, I don't know anything about witchcraft or how any of it works, but I think the idea is that the more, a reason that there's various reasons to have a coven, but having more of you and having especially when you have a very tight bond makes your magic stronger.
Sure. Which they talk about
and so
in
I think
the movie.
So I think when they do spells together and stuff like that, it does help Winifred and make the spell stronger, but they don't seem to have the zappy finger,
right?
That she has in the first movie and doesn't have in this one until they do the ultimate spell and then she has it. I guess I just realized that as I was saying it. I'm like, wait a minute. She had because there's the whole put you there with the.
Well, she turns Thackeray Binks into a cat in the first movie.
Yeah,
with her magic,
right. And
she zaps him and keeps him up the wall and then turns him into a cat. What? Where's this?
And they do mention that at the beginning of the first one, after we get past that part, because they're full strong witches then, because when Thackeray gets turned into a cat, it's during the Salem time. So they've been practicing and they're beefed up. But when they come back, she still has that magic, at least enough of it to throw Max around. Yeah. But she does mention that she's weaker because she's been, in hibernation essentially for 300 years. So they have to do that cauldron spell that they do to make themselves a little bit more younger. And then it's oh wait, but if we eat souls of children, that'll make us young forever. So there's still enough magic there to not eat children and to still be powerful. But for some reason, there's none of it when they come back in this movie.
Well,
and
they introduced the MacGuffin spell. That's why. I mean, that's what it feels like. They introduce a spell that's don't do this spell. If you do, bad things will happen, to the point where the book now has agency, and the book's I'm not going to let you see that. And it's all right.
Yeah. Nope, you're not allowed.
And this movie falls into a trap that so many sequels do, which is introducing a bunch of stuff that breaks the first movie.
Yeah.
Right. And then
in an attempt to an attempt to correct it in certain ways to make it work for this movie.
Right.
But
a very neutered version of the first movie. It's neutered to the max. Like you said, there's no stakes, there's no villains. And in a lot of ways, I mean, the biggest complaint that you could walk away from this movie with is it just feels like a movie that they made to set up a fucking sequel or a TV show or some third property that is going to trade on the Hocus Pocus name, but have essentially nothing to do with it other than lol witches in Salem.
Like I could see either a prequel show, or I could see, a show with the three girls that we meet in this movie, Becca and her friends, starting a coven and stuff like that. And it being like you said, a Hocus Pocus spin-off essentially.
Yeah.
If we're gonna get a spinoff, I want to see Billy Butcherson and Sarah and Winifred's love triangle story that we get to hear about so much in this movie, and about how everybody was wrong.
It felt like that feels like a just response by committee. You know what I mean? Like, oh, he wasn't actually a bad guy. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care. He's been locked in a crypt. Like, of course he's not a bad guy. No one deserves to become a zombie for 300 years or whatever the fuck it was. Like,
right. With his mouth sewn shut. And yeah.
What's weird is,
and also they I kind of got that illusion in the first movie too, that it was like, they say that like Winifred got jealous of Sarah and did what she did, which is still essentially what happened. It's just, that Billy didn't actually date Winifred like it was said that he did. And why was their love life so well tracked?
Like children's love lives. 12-year-olds.
Well, not necessarily, because
I don't know how that whole kissing Billy Butcherson thing is referenced when they're kids. In the first movie, they kind of in the first movie, you're made to believe
they say they're teenagers,
right? Well, but like they look 12.
I think in
her kissing Billy Butcherson already has happened, right? At the beginning of this movie, they talk about it. They literally say, like, you kissed him. Yeah. That's why I don't understand any of this. Like, it makes, like you said, it makes no sense. True. Because they're, like you said, why are their lives tracked so well? They're literally children. And that was why it's weird, because then again, we're supposed to sympathize with these characters and feel like Winifred's not a terrible person.
Right. I mean, honestly, she's a pretty shitty sister. She is in the first one too, but because she's a villain, it's more forgivable. Not forgivable, but it's more expected.
Right.
Because obviously she's an evil witch. Like, she's not going to be nice to anybody. Like,
there was no empathy written.
No. And her being, terrible to her sisters, you can't argue, is like the way that she does express like her care about them and stuff like that, because she doesn't know how to do it any other way. But it works better when they're villains.
It's less problematic.
At least for the majority of the story. I am all for them having a character arc change.
Yeah, agreed.
To like make them into redemptive characters. I'm so here for a redemptive arc for them. That's fine. I love it. That's great. But I think that they just didn't know how to get there. That like it was either too. I don't know. I don't know what the reason was, but it kind of feels like just the entire second act feels like they didn't know how to get there with the arc of the redemptive story. So they just kind of pushed them to the side until we could get to the third act, which is then, the big climax with the spell and da-da-da-da-da. But there needed to be a bit more of a bridge to what was happening. Like I need like the Sanderson sisters to really be working to get back to whatever they're trying to accomplish, instead of just hanging out for, 30 minutes of the movie.
And that's what it feels like. It's nice to see Bette Midler and Sarah Jessica Parker and Kathy Najimy in the film and back as the Sanderson sisters. I mean, that's why you're here. That's why you're watching this movie. That's the reason anybody's watching this movie.
And there's a musical sequence.
Right out of the gate.
Oh God, yeah. They got it over with fast. They were like, we know you want one of these.
There's two. There's one in the graveyard, and then there's one on stage, one or the other.
Yeah.
One or the other. Because, like, I think my favorite scene is in the movie is when they show up, and then they're like, the one friend is like, who are they singing for? And it's like, for you. And it's like, God damn, that was great. And then they do it again. They redo the scene from the first movie again, and it's not very good. Yeah. And it's not very good. And I mean, I was appreciative of seeing a bunch of drag queens, Ginger Minge and Kimora Hall show up. Cool. That's great. To what end? No end. No end. And there's like an idiot boyfriend character that goes nowhere. Like, it feels like they just have a bunch of ideas. And then it's like, you know what? You should have made this movie about the Sanderson sisters coming back. And what does that mean for people in 2022? Yeah. Not like, how do the Sanderson sisters deal with being back in 2022? Because like, they're not going to deal with it very well, regardless of when they come back, because they're out of time. But the people
we go to a Walgreens, an actual Walgreens. Not just
product placement by Walgreens.
A whole ass Walgreens. And they, are all enamored by the electric door, which sure, by the sliding door, which sure, we get that in the first movie too, when they're like freaked out by the TV and cars.
all of a sudden they're a lot
great,
more comfortable
awesome.
with everything all of a sudden.
Exactly. Yeah, they adapted like really well this time around. You know, it I did like the Roombas eating the salt. I thought that was funny.
I mean, that was when that happened, I was like, oh, okay. Like, that's why they're Roombas. Like, now it made sense. Like, it not only made sense, but it was like it was a nice way to get themselves out of that situation. It worked. It didn't feel contrived.
Right.
Like Tony Hale standing in line for a caramel apple for half of the movie, which felt like beyond fucking contrived. Like, you took Tony Hale, who's ostensibly the fifth greatest actor in this movie behind Doug Jones and the other three, and you did nothing with him. Like, why?
He's literally just standing in line for most of the movie, trying to get a candy apple.
Yeah, like no exaggeration.
Specifically for one vendor.
Yeah,
because nothing else will work.
He's gonna cream his pants at the thought of these fucking caramel apple. I kind of liked him though. Like, I liked the character, like the dorky dumbass dad. Like,
I kind of wish there was more with that. Like, that would have been more fun.
He interacts with the Sanderson sisters in one scene. Like, really? Really?
Right.
Really?
I mean, how they could have done some dumb possession thing too, and like had like the Reverend actually take him over, and that would have been kind of like, that would have added some stakes to it. It would have been a little contrived, but it would have at least gave him more to do and gave his character more of a point, other than just being descendant from a guy that
don't you understand? He's like opposite of his Reverend ancestor. He's opposite. He's just a big dumb idiot who loves Halloween. I mean, it kind of works,
and candy apples.
but they don't do anything with it. Like, that's it. Like, that is as much as they do, is say he's an idiot.
Yeah.
He's like a big, lovable, goofy dad. Like, everybody knows.
Well, and I do kind of want to know what happened to Allison's family, though, because they were pretty prominent family of Salem, from what we gathered. You know, of their Halloween party and everything. Like, wasn't her dad the mayor or some shit?
Yeah, he's the mayor in the movie. Like, it's it strikes me of a little bit of a, what is it, Back to the Future 2, where it's like, I'm gonna be mayor. It feels that same, like, 300 years later and nothing has changed. Like,
right. Yeah.
Other than he's adult now and not a terrible, Witchfinder Pulsifer, whatever the fuck he's. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. I've been reading Good Omens, and that's the Witchfinder general thing is really what he's going for. Which I think I love Tony Hale. He's great. Just like give the poor guy more to do, because he's a great actor. But just
it was a very undersold or underdone performance, just because there was nothing to do with it. Like, it was just literally just standing in line
and acting like a goofball.
So, we mentioned things that like they bring up and then they don't really kind of tie up. And like the second musical sequence that happens is the one that turns an audience into, like
zombies,
dancing machines, like can't, dance until you die situation. But it's a dance until you find the Reverend or Tony Hale, essentially, which they do. And then I guess they're just done, because unlike in the first movie, when we do like everything's done and whatever and the sun's coming up, they do go back to the people that you'd kind of forgotten about throughout the movie and find out that they had still been dancing that whole fucking time. Like, for real. She was going to kill them. And she was going to dance them until they died. Literally.
They were those parents. Charles Rocket was going to die.
Pass out. Yeah.
Right? Like, that was the whole point of that. She's like, dance until you die. Like, until they're actually dead.
Yeah, they're just going to leave them in this room, like in this hall, and just let them dance, until that happens. But in this one, it just kind of ends because it was a dance until you find someone situation. And then nobody even, like, bats a fucking eye about it.
Well, they don't even find him. They find him, and then they just take his caramel apple, and then they go away.
Yeah, they really didn't. They just, I guess they found him, like they came upon him, and then that was enough. She didn't say find him and bring him back to me. You have to be specific with the zombie dance.
I guess so. I guess that's what it is. I think this is one of those movies where it's like, I enjoyed it as long as I don't think about it too much. But once I start like really doing what we do here on this podcast and like actively talking about it, it feels exactly like what it is in a lot of ways. A very weak follow-up to a movie that has a lot of style. That's an interesting movie that has some pretty good performances that are rather, I wouldn't say scary per se, but Bette Midler.
Wow.
Bette Midler's performance in that first movie is great. I mean, it's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
In this movie, it's not much of anything. Like it's trading on the cachet that you had from that first movie. Like way to not do much other than say, like, without saying "memba" the first movie, they kind of just do that. Like "memba" the Sanderson sisters. Like,
yeah, this is what they're kind of like. They're 20 years older now.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair though, they really don't look it. Not much. I mean, you can tell they are older, but they still look great. I mean,
they were doing a weird thing with Sarah Jessica Parker's eyebrows that they didn't do in the first movie, where they had her eyebrows like come down beneath her brow line, which very weird, strange,
it was
off-putting choice.
Some of her, the makeup
ugly up Sarah Jessica Parker. Weird. Don't ugly up any of these women, please. Like, don't do that. Like,
they're all great looking.
Yeah,
like, just leave them.
Yeah, and you can tell that
they're great looking. Let's leave them.
And you can tell they're having a good time. Bette Midler's having a good time. Bette Midler's 76. She looks good for her age. Kathy Najimy looks fantastic. Sarah Jessica Parker looks great.
Still be able to do all that shit.
Yeah, good for them. Good for them. Good for them having the wherewithal to answer questions about this movie for the last 20 years. Because if you go on Wikipedia and do any research and go through and read their interviews, they were just as big of a fans of the original movie as the fans are. And I think that's the weird thing about this movie is most of the time they make sequels for the fans. And this doesn't feel like it. This feels like a sequel that somebody was like, you know what? Let's make a sequel to Hocus Pocus, but I don't want it to be Hocus Pocus. Like, I want it to be a launching point for something else, which is what it feels like. Because like the way it ends, feel like,
okay, we're retiring. Yeah, we're retiring the Sanderson sisters. They're done.
Mm-hmm.
They're not coming back. Which, like I said at the top of this podcast, if you're going to do a Hocus Pocus movie, you have to do it with the original three.
At least one of them. At least one of them to put them away for another movie. But like they didn't do a very good job of that. Like that's the problem. It's just.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the problem is that in theory you can always bring back the Sanderson sisters, right? You just have to light the candle.
Completely undercut your emotional third act of this movie, though.
I mean, look, I cried.
I know. I mean, like, I get it. That's the problem. Like, if they bring them back, do they not undo the finale of this movie entirely?
Do. Yeah, they do. And they totally do. And so, like...
Then they made you cry for no reason. They made my wife cry for no reason. Like, it sucks. Right. That's my issue. It's like, if you do that, you're just proving a point.
That's endgame shit. That's endgame shit.
Well, that's Halloween ends. It's Halloween ends. It's the same thing.
We're going to kill these people with no actual consequence because you know damn well they're bringing them back in the next movie.
Right.
Now, I can think that while maybe, yes, they did allude to a Black Flame Candle 2 situation, I can see them just actually being done with the Sanderson sisters and maybe it bringing back a different witch.
You think a movie called Hocus Pocus 3 is not going to have the Sanderson sisters in it in some form or fashion? Really? Really? Can you tell me that?
Bette Midler's kind of old.
I mean, if it takes less than 5 years, if it takes less than 5 years, I guarantee.
I mean, hell, they could be filming it right now. We have no idea.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, again, like by the end of this, I wasn't sure I wanted to see anymore.
I would be fine if this was it.
Yeah,
I would be purely happy if this was it.
Because like, whatever this is going to be more of this. And what this was rather toothless and neutered.
And while we have we've picked it apart and we've talked about it in an analytical way, from like a little kid version of me way, like my inner child, I really liked it. Like I liked it. Was a fun time. It was a nice little hour and 20-minute whatever, good time with some good references with the witches that I remember and wanted to see. And, it was fine. It was what I wanted to see. Did I want to see a little more in the horror world? Yeah, of course I do. I always want to see that, like that's just the person I am. And that's the kind of kid that I was too. And that's what I, gravitated to things like Hocus Pocus and Are You Afraid of the Dark and stuff like that. Because while they were for kids or, for younger people, they still had an edge to them. They still were about real things, like the bullying aspect within Hocus Pocus. That's a real kid issue. And in this one, I think to me, like what kind of takes the guts out of a lot of programming for, younger kids. And by younger kids, I mean like 12 and under. There is a real lack of like talking about kid issues, like issues that are specific to children, you know, that were very apparent in movies that we had when we were kids. You know, there was a lot of movies where people's parents were divorced. There was a lot of movies where people had to make big moves and change schools and deal with bullying and deal with all of the stuff. And like that stuff was pretty like, you know, that stuff did scare me, you know, or make me uncomfortable as a kid, but it's because I could relate to it. It was something that like I was familiar with.
Right.
But within like programming now, like content now that I see for younger kids, it kind of pulls some of that. It pulls a lot of that out. Like now everybody's parents are super awesome, like all the time. The most support,
like Tony Hale's character.
Yeah. The most supportive parents in the world and and you know everybody's there's just a lot less like real stuff that children and younger people actually do deal with, whether or not older people want to think about it and have to acknowledge their roles in it also. And I do feel that is missing from a lot of you know programming and stuff for kids these days, and that I think
programming, quote unquote.
Yeah. And I think that is kind of, that's doing, you know, a big disservice to younger audiences and making like kind of pandering and dumbing things down essentially and taking out a lot of like relatable uncomfortableness that kids don't know how to express yet because they're not old enough and don't, you know, have the language or have the wherewithal or have the, you know, agency to talk about it, but they can see it happening on screen and kind of like absorb it and see what things apply to their life. And without that, I don't know what that essentially means, but
it's just a bunch of really, that's the thing. Like
or look, maybe I was traumatized by things like Fox and the Hound. I don't know.
Well, I think what it boils down to for me in a lot of ways is a softening of reality. Like you mentioned, like it kind of, Disney doesn't operate on the same wavelength as the rest of us, and that's fine. Right. But like even the first Hocus Pocus had some, like again, you said, like things that real kids are having to deal with. Like this movie, like these kids talk like adults, you know, like they don't talk like teenagers. They talk like adults, and they're very tuned in and dialed in, like a lot of kids are now. Like I'm not gonna bemoan the movie for writing teenagers the way that a lot of teenagers are now, but yeah, it's not conducive to genuine storytelling to pretend like these things aren't going on and
like,
just say, well, the spooky witches are the real problem. Like, I guess.
But we don't even get a reason as to why Becca and her friend and her other friend Cassie have had this apparently very big falling out, and they were extremely good friends to what we are led to believe in this movie. And we don't even touch on that really, other than we acknowledge that it's a thing and that Cassie's not talking to them right now. And the only reason we learn that is because they are trying to prevent the Sanderson sisters from arriving at a party that Cassie's having with all the other, you know, kids there. And that's pretty much it. And then their friendship is pretty well resolved. That is simply based on the fact that the Sanderson sisters are in town now. And it's like, well, fuck all of our other issues. We have one bigger one. But it's never talked about. There's never any real like sit down reconciliation between those characters. Like there kind of is, but it's nothing like real, you know, emotional. It's nothing real deep on any like beyond surface level. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I was blah, blah, blah. But that's a very, like you said, neutered reality of issues that kids have to deal with, and especially issues of friendship and friendship falling out and friend groups having problems, because those are like the end all be all issues for kids of a certain age. Like, you know, friend fights and friend falling outs are hugely impactful.
Right. Oh, yeah.
To younger kids, to adults too, but to teenagers especially.
Yeah. Well, and I think ultimately when you like look at the cast and the credits and the people who worked on this film, it's weird that we get this movie because David Kirshner, like he was part of the original movie, so he's still given a story credit. I don't know if he helped, but like
I'm sure it's the Disneyfication.
It's the Disney plussing of it. I don't like this movie could not come out in theaters, right? I don't feel like If I would walk out of this movie disappointed if I saw it in theaters.
I feel like people would have definitely gone and seen it when it came out, if it came out in theaters. I think there's enough, loyalty to the first one that people would have gone to see it the first weekend. I think that it probably would have tapered off pretty fast, though.
Yeah.
I think that all the people who would have wanted to see it right away would have, and then that would be it. And I mean, like, it is a streaming movie, so the idea is that you can go back and watch it whenever you want. I don't know that I'm really going to rewatch this movie much. Like, I'm sure I'll check it out again, like next, Halloween or whatever. I might watch them both back to back just to see. But as far as like rewatchability, it's not something that's going to be on my go-to list for all time.
It tries to do the characters from the first film here's the thing. People love the characters from the first movie. That's what they love. Yeah. They love those three characters and Billy Butcherson, nothing else. People weren't,
I mean, even Max and Allison too are at least like decent enough,
I know, but nobody's complaining that they're not in this movie. You know what I mean?
They're not.
but and I think that's the issue, like, overall,
Birch is too big of a star now, I guess.
I think the issue ultimately with this movie just comes down to a really muddle-headed script that says, well, everybody likes the Sanderson sisters, so instead of just making them villains, you have to like them now. And it's like, people liked them for 20 years when they were child murderers.
Yeah,
like,
they've been murderers this whole time and we love them.
Right. Like, why are you attempting to do anything else other, like, I'm not saying remake the first movie, but keep it in line tonally with that first movie.
Yeah.
Just because it's on Disney Plus doesn't mean it has to be a complete fucking child movie. It has baby's first witch movie. Like, I just don't get it. I don't understand ultimately if we're spending 20 years waiting for a sequel to this movie to come out, which people have been waiting. They get this and it's just, well, I guess we got to see the Sanderson sisters. So there's that. It feels like it's like, well, you get to see them. What else do you need?
Yeah.
A lot more.
A lot, actually.
Yeah.
A decent amount more, it turns out.
Yeah. And the original movie had Charles Rocket in it, for fuck's sake. Like, I mean, like, it wasn't bereft of actual casting choices. There were Doug Jones, obviously, in that movie and this movie. I mean, they cast Bette Midler in the first movie. But you come to this movie and it's like, okay, so it's the original sisters and that's it. Like, you're not doing anything else. Like, no, it's just them and you love them. So here's more of them doing funny stuff. And it's like, we liked them because they were kind of like over the top evil. Like, that's why we liked them, not because they're, they love each other as sisters. Like, I appreciate that. But like, that's why is that?
And not because, they're funny. Technology is confusing. Like, that was a part of it, sure, but no, like, what everybody remembers is, the shitty things that Winifred says and, Sarah flying over singing her song and all of that stuff. That's what everybody likes, and
they didn't even approach
being
that.
Evil.
They didn't even approach Sarah Jessica Parker's character. They couldn't. They were like, "Oh, she fucks teenage boys and kills them." Like,
and she just lures them to their death. Yeah, with her siren song, and it's like, well, yeah, maybe we should incorporate that.
There's like weird sexual tension between her and Omri Katz in the first movie, though. Like, her character is intentionally sexual. It's very weird. And with like the bus driver, and then with Gary Marshall, like,
every man that she comes, like, and any biological cis identifying male person.
Be specific now, Jess.
Although I would really love to see Sarah come in contact with with a non-binary masked looking person like me and be like, I don't know what to do with it.
Call you dude. That's what they would do.
Yeah. Young man.
I wanted more from this movie. I hope that the fans of the original movie that are bigger fans of it than me feel like they got what they wanted, but I can't help but wonder and assume that they didn't.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the added, the glow of it finally happening and like it being a thing.
Right.
Like the initial, good. Like, I'm just happy it's here. We're just happy it's out. I do wonder at the rewatch, like overall the longevity of this movie versus the longevity of the first one, I think is very obvious as to which one is going to continue to live on. as still people's favorite and the one they think of.
Yeah, I can't imagine someone rewatching this and going, "Oh, that's my favorite one." Like,
yeah,
maybe
unless it's a situation like a lot of us had that we're very young and see that one first, and it might just resonate, on that level. But
I think if you don't think about it too hard, it's okay. But Disney cannot sing the praises of this movie when Disney didn't give a shit about the first one. It took them 20 years to make it. They made it only because Disney Plus exists. If that Disney Plus had never come along, Disney would have done nothing with it. Like those are the realities of all of this. Like it's a corporate product made by Disney because they know that it's going to sell Hocus Pocus merchandise, which is fine. But the only reason I say all of that is because the movie wasn't very good. If the movie had been great, I would not care that that's what it's for. Because then it's like, well, if that's what it's for, fine. But the movie's also entertaining. It's like, it's nice to see the three of them again. It's really nice to see Doug Jones again. But like outside of that, like I could leave it, really. Like the first movie is still not just significantly better, but it actually plays in the horror sandbox. It actually is a horror movie. It has the horror tropes
that did then,
right?
And that's why a lot of people in our age group, there are a lot of horror fans in our age group, and I think that a lot of it is because in the 90s there were, at least for kids programming, a lot of it was in the horror adjacent arena. I mean, there was a lot
biggest
of
books
weird
we were biggest books to read when we were growing up were Goosebumps books.
Yeah, Goosebumps. I mean, I was, I've mentioned it many times. Are You Afraid of the Dark, Kid? Courage the Cowardly Dog. I mean, hell, even the cartoons that weren't necessarily horror cartoons, but like Rocko's Modern Life and Rugrats had horror references in them all the time.
Fear Indiana featuring Omri Katz.
Yeah. Eerie Indiana. Yeah.
Eerie Indiana. But he's in that, right? Like, look, I think the horror genre is not something that, like, there are horror shows on Disney, but they're like weird. Do you know about the Disney zombie show?
No.
There's like a zombie show on Disney Plus that's like teenage zombies. It's exactly what it sounds like. Like
there's just zombies in high school.
But they're sentient zombies, but they're not bad. Like it
right. It's
what they did to the Sanderson sisters.
Yeah. And it is kind of what people were worried about when Disney started merging a lot of other production companies within them and studios within them, because we do get things like this, where had Hocus Pocus 2 been handled by someone other than Disney, we probably would have gotten something a little bit more horror-y, because they still would have been aiming it at our generation too. So it would have had to be something a bit more adult. And with Disney owning, all of the properties, that's
literally
kind of where
everything.
we're going to be. Yeah, that's where we're going to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's one of these things where sometimes, as Fred Gwynn says in Pet Sematary, sometimes dead is better. Sometimes it's better just to leave it alone.
And you don't want to go down that road.
I'm not saying that they should never have made this movie, but put more effort in. Give everybody more to do. Really hew closer to the original source material's tone. You can do a redemptive arc, but this is not the way to do it. Where it's like, oh, they're just good guys now. They're heroes.
Much darker characters.
Yeah.
Much darker characters than the Sanderson sisters have been redeemed in many a property, be they Disney or not.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there are some horrific fictional characters out there who have gone through what you would never even imagine they could possibly go through a redemptive arc, and they have. So yeah, it's not hard to think of a good way to do that for the Sanderson sisters. That's not completely just stripping them of anything that makes them witches, essentially, like, scary witches.
Yeah. Well, and the original cast for the most part came back outside of the kids, and there's a plus there. Everybody got paid a lot of money, I'm sure. People are happy, like you said, that a second one came out. But yeah, for me, it's okay. And I was hoping for more, because there's part of me that worries that we're going to get Halloween Town something, and it's going to be this, and I'm going to hate it, and I don't want it, because Halloween Town is Hocus Pocus for me. And that's like, Hocus Pocus is not, it is a kid's movie, but it's not. Halloween Town is like definitely a kid's movie. Like I have no issue arguing that, but it has charm to it. Like this movie's not charming. And my concern is like they do Halloween Town 5 or whatever it would be. And there's no charm to it. And there's no charm here either.
I did really miss, like I said earlier in this podcast, that it's a Halloween movie. And by that, I mean, it's a movie that you watch around Halloween time because the atmosphere it gives you is Halloween. It takes place on Halloween night, whatever. But unlike the first one, where the town that they live in, Salem, it is Salem. Right?
It is Salem. It is Salem. Okay. This is in Rhode Island, not Salem.
Yes, exactly. But they take away the look of the town that gave it that very fall feeling. Like in the first one, you get a lot of like scenic shots of like leaves changing. Allison's house is, all of the houses are completely decked out, like the town goes crazy for Halloween.
Right.
So they, all the houses are massive and do these really elaborate Halloween setups and stuff like that. And it looks cool and it feels like you're in Halloween. Halloween Town does that too, where it's a lot of practical stuff that sets up this very, Halloween aesthetic that feels fun to be in. And in this movie, there's really not, and by this movie, I mean Hocus Pocus 2, there's not a lot of that. And why, I do kind of have a problem with the Walgreens thing because it was so glaring that like, it is like it feels like you walked into a Walgreens with the fucking like bright fucking fluorescent lighting that they went for with that scene. And to me, it's like they went like, we're seeing this visual over seeing like, the fall aesthetic and things like that make it much more of a Halloween time feeling.
Yeah, I agree. And hey, you know what I'm surprised by? I've been to Walgreens recently. They don't have like a giant Sanderson Sisters thing in there that they're trying to sell stuff. I was kind of surprised. It feels like
I am, yeah.
That Walgreens thing like really is egregious.
It did bother me.
It's bad. It's like when characters go to McDonald's in a movie or something else. Like, do they need this? Like, does Walgreens need this? Like, really? Like, do people not know who Walgreens are? Like,
right. Like, how much?
Two choices for meds: CVS and Walgreens. Like,
or Rite Aid if you're really desperate.
Right. But like nationally, Walgreens and CVS, like, do these brands really need help with visibility?
Right.
Like,
or when somebody's drinking like, if somebody's drinking like a Coca-Cola, whatever, fine. I can kind of let that
using a Sony phone.
Right. But you went into a whole ass establishment, like you went into a real Walgreens.
Yeah.
And did this shit. And like, just the amount of time I can, like, even though it was a very brief scene for the movie.
It's not that brief.
The amount of it's not that brief.
It's like 10 minutes.
Yeah, fair.
It goes on for so long that at some point you're just like, fine, they're in a Walgreens. Like, you know what I mean?
I get it.
Like, all right,
fine.
Yeah.
Like if it were CVS, they would have left with a ridiculously long receipt. I guarantee you.
Right.
Like, it would have been that. And yeah, that bothers me. And that's also a Disney thing where it's very much the massive corporate product placement.
Yeah. Well, I would say like that, the thing that always makes me laugh in like all those Sony movies is they're all Sony phone, Sony Vio, Sony this. Yeah. And it's like, oh my God, do you know this is a Sony movie?
In every Marvel movie, they're eating or drinking or snacking on some sort of, notable thing. And it's just like, why? Just why?
Do people not know what M&Ms are? Like,
right. Just other than give me a reason beyond blatant product placement and I will maybe give you a chance. But I know you have no reason beyond blatant product placement, and that it's because they're companies that you also have stakes in. Like,
do you think that in the script they were like, they go into a Walgreens? Do you think that's what it said in the script? Given that you and I also do writing, do you think that's what it was? They were like, and then they go into and then the Sanderson Sisters, fluorescent lights are bright and take all of the fucking color out of the scene.
The Sanderson Sisters are startled by the sliding glass door that accompanies every Walgreens.
Sliding glass door that we've already done this gag once before.
Yes.
God. Yeah. I think if you could point to what the problem with this movie is. Like the Walgreens scene is almost like a microcosm. It's like you just don't understand. You think you understand what made the first movie good, which was the Sanderson sisters, but it wasn't just the three of them. It was also Doug Jones. It was also the direction by Kenny Ortega of all goddamn people. But it was also the influence of someone who we haven't even talked about.
It was the locations.
Also, Mick Garris, for fuck's sake. Like, Mick Garris is a horror director. He was a producer on that original film. Yes. I think he's a producer on this one. No, he's not. It's just he has a based on the characters by. And I feel like I'm not going to drag Annie Fletcher because she seemingly doesn't do horror movies. Some of her other films, Hot Pursuit, The Guilt Trip, The Proposal, 27 Dresses, and Step Up. Like, okay, but she's a choreographer for the most part, which is interesting because, again,
which is why we get 2 dance sequences.
But also Kenny Ortega is a choreographer.
Yeah, which is why we got one really good one.
Right. And so I appreciate what they were going for with having her as the director, but she also, it's not that she doesn't bring anything to it, but I don't think there's anything to be brought. I think the script is gotta be the problem here, like almost entirely.
And I also wonder, like, budget wise, what's the budget difference between the first one and the second one? Because while we're still contained to one town in this movie, it does feel a bit bigger. Like it does feel especially with having 2 dance sequences, having the Walgreens, having, the town itself is bigger. It just seems like a bigger movie, and I'm sure the budget is because it's 30 years later, so guaranteed the budget would be bigger anyway. Hold on with this asshole pen. There we go. Yep, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of them. Be gone. God, the only reason, like the only saving grace of winter is that fucking shit is gone.
That's fair.
But, obviously the 30-year difference would make the budget bigger just by inflation and cost, resources, all of that shit anyways. But I want to know, like, and, Bette Midler's, pay, I'm sure, has gone up all of their pays have gone up in the years that have preceded that.
Sarah Jessica Parker and Kathy Najimy, have they done things since then? Oh, yeah. They're collecting residuals for TV shows that they were on for decades plus. So, yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Kathy Najimy, voice of Hank Hill's wife in King of the Hill, right? Like,
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and Sarah Jessica Parker, like,
Sex and the City. Yeah,
fuck, like, forever. Do you need to work anymore? Like, the residual checks
Like, they
alone.
even brought that show back. Like,
right, yeah. Isn't it still back?
I think so, yeah.
God,
I think it was more than just a 1-season thing.
Yeah. I feel like even with the budget that they had, the CGI is real not great.
Yeah, it's not great. Thankfully, there's not a lot of it. I will say that at least it's not like hugely CGI'd.
No, but it's still it still feels like a streaming movie. Like it does. Yeah.
It feels very empty. It feels very like most, like my main complaint about watching TV shows streaming that like come out all at once is that it's really easy to do a lot of lazy writing in your mid-season episodes, because you're banking on the fact that people are watching them back to back to back to back to back. So they're getting to the plot points quicker than if they were being released weekly. Therefore, you can pad your show with a bunch of nothing because people are going to just breeze by it anyway, and not versus if you released it weekly, people would be like, I'm fucking bored. You better pick up the pace.
Otherwise, I'm not tuning
with the show. Right. And then it becomes oh no, ratings. But now people can just, watch 15 episodes on a Saturday, and maybe 6 to 8 of those episodes are actually worthy of actual story points. And the rest of it is just filler. And that honestly, like this whole second act of this movie feels like filler, as we talk about it. That's, I think, what we're coming to the conclusion here is that the second act is barely a second act.
Well, barely anything even happens. It's go and find the ingredients, random character who we're supposed to care about but don't because you've given us nothing to do. And then the Sanderson sisters are just kind of hanging out and walking around in a Walgreens. Like, yeah,
it's a go fetch quest. And like with a character you don't really give a shit about, where the other characters you do want to spend time with have just gone off. somewhere.
Yeah, they're off flying around. They're doing bad things.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, probably not. These characters probably not.
No, they're probably just hanging out in their house.
In the Walgreens.
Yeah, they're
Hanging out in the Walgreens is pretty sure. Like, I don't know where else they are, but they're probably in Walgreens. God. Yeah.
This podcast is not sponsored by Walgreens.
No, but I don't think the movie is either, but you could have fucking fooled me.
Right.
Final thoughts on Hocus Pocus 2, Jess?
My final thoughts are that my inner child is happy that it exists. I had fun with it when I watched it. Overall, as a movie. Overall, as like, you know, looking at it through a lens of like a person who has watched many movies, it's not great. It from that standpoint. But I do feel like if you are a fan of the original one, you will find a lot to enjoy of this. And I think that, you know, it is going to be a good gateway movie for kids to seeing the first one and, you know, exploring, you know, the horror avenue for kids, which I'm always all for. So,
yeah, I think as long as, you know, folks like my wife are happy that this is what they wanted, like, good. As far as I'm concerned, if this is what fans of the first movie wanted and they're happy, good. For me,
yeah.
Like you said, I don't have a nostalgic connection to this movie, so I have to come at this completely as a movie watcher.
And I definitely do.
Yeah, and I know, well, and that's the thing. Like, you have as well.
You know, I cried at the end because I love the Sanderson sisters. I like those characters. And, you know, you do get that sisterly feel from them in the first movie, even though Winifred is mean to them. She has points throughout that first movie where she's like, but I do love, you know, these two chuckleheads who are my sisters. Like, right. So there's that nice emotional throughway with them. But as far as everybody else in the movie goes, performances, fine, great, awesome. They play their characters very well. I'm not given much to know about their characters, so I don't care much about their characters.
And look,
because the movie doesn't want me to.
Right. Well, and the movie didn't bring back the original 3 kids from the first movie, so there's no attachment there. Maybe they should have brought them back. Maybe that was the right answer, to bring them back, to really have it be a continuation of their story and their, you know, the other story. I mean, you know what? Why not just have the Salem prequel part of this movie be connecting the Sanderson sisters to those characters from the first movie, which gives us a reason to see them again. If you're going to retcon stuff, at least retcon shit to make sense. Don't just be like, oh, they got a book. This is where they got. Who cares about them getting the book? Like, what? I don't care how Han Solo got the scar on his chin. Like, you don't have to tell me why his last name is Solo. I don't need to see them getting the book. Like, I'm glad they didn't show Winifred's teeth growing type thing. Like, it's just, you don't have to explain everything because you think the audience needs to know. In some respects, not telling the audience is a smarter option than laying everything out, because they laid everything out in this movie and it makes no sense. They're child murderers. Sorry.
Yeah, like showing us them as kids isn't going to change that fact. And you kind of really don't, like, even by showing them as kids doesn't really redeem them even then, because they are kind of terrors of the town.
Right. They light somebody's house on fire.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, like, they're reasonably, like, not liked in this town.
Right. They're a problem. Like, why?
And the whole thing with the book, you know, in the whole first movie, it's we got to keep the book away from the sisters, but then all of a sudden in this movie the book has a conscience.
Right, like, why?
And it's like, oh wait, no, these people are evil, never mind. I didn't realize that over these last 300 years, but now
when they were murdering kids and turning children into black cats.
But like, now that she wants to do that one spell, I've had enough.
MacGuffin spell. Like, sick of movies with MacGuffins. I'm sick of it. No, I look, again, like I've said, if people that were into the first movie like this movie, great, then this is success. For me, not so much. It defangs everything that made that first movie what I was into. And look, that's me. So that's me. There you go. So, Jess, where can people find you when you're not here doing a random bonus episode for Hocus Pocus 2?
You can find me on Instagram at writer Jess Byard. You can find me on TikTok at the same handle. You can also find me on our other podcast, Scary Stories We Tell. And you'll be finding me on more episodes of Kulturecast coming up.
As for me, weirdingwaymedia.com, that's the podcast network that we created. And yeah, we have 19 and counting shows. So if you can't find something on there to listen to, it's not for a lack of having content, but there's plenty of things to find at Weirding Way Media. If you want to hear my stuff specifically, cstachu.com, cstachiw.com. That's my link tree for all the stuff that I work on, but Weirding Way Media is where you're going to want to go. As for this show, patreon.com/Kulturecast. If you want to do the monetary thing, if not, just rate and review the show on iTunes. That's a better way if you can't do monetarily, which I totally understand because shit's hard, time's hard. Things are fucking weird, folks. Hocus Pocus 2 came out. Like, for real.
Right.
We're truly living in the end times.
We're so desperate for something to make us happy that Hocus Pocus 2 came out.
Yeah. Will this take me away for an hour and a half of my day? Yes. But I still have to return, unfortunately. So, Jess, thank you so much for joining me. This is fun. It's been
Absolutely.
since June since we did one of these. And we'll catch you on the next episode.